My name is Emily. I am 30. I was sitting at my mother's dining table in Asheville, North Carolina on Thanksgiving evening when my mother set down her wine glass and told everyone at the table that she'd always known I was cheating on my husband months before he ever suspected it himself. My husband, Marcus, sitting beside me, didn't raise his voice. He simply reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and set it on the table, screen facing my mother. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what happened, take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read everyone. Now let me take you back to the months before that dinner, to a marriage nearly broken by a scheme I didn't even know existed until it was already unraveling. I live now in a small craftsman house in West Asheville with a garden bed out front that Marcus and I built together the summer we moved in, mostly tomatoes and herbs neither of us knows fully how to keep alive past August. My mornings start at 6:15 a.m., coffee on the back porch before the day gets loud, watching the fog sit low over the ridge behind our street. There's a small stack of grant applications on my desk at home I review before most workdays even officially start, and a framed photo from our wedding on the bookshelf, slightly crooked, that neither of us has ever bothered to straighten. I wear a thin gold ring with a small sapphire, Marcus's grandmother's, given to me the night we were engaged 4 years ago on a bridge over the French Broad River. I work as a project manager for a regional healthcare nonprofit, a job I've held for 6 years, coordinating grant-funded programs across 3 counties. Nobody in my extended family has ever asked a real question about what that work actually involves. This matters for what comes next. I grew up in Asheville, the only daughter of my mother, Diane, and my father, who passed when I was 16. My mother remarried briefly in my 20s to a man named Harold, a marriage that ended after less than 3 years, and in the years since, she's developed a specific habit of deciding without much invitation what everyone else in the family should be doing differently. When I introduced her to Marcus 5 years ago, her first comment over dinner at her house was that he didn't seem like much of a future, a line she delivered while refilling her own wine glass rather than looking at either of us. She'd wanted me, for reasons she never fully explained, to end up with a family friend's son named Trent, whose family owned several properties downtown, and who I dated briefly in college before deciding calmly that we wanted different lives. Trent's mother and mine had been close for decades, and I sometimes wondered if my mother's disappointment had less to do with Marcus specifically and more with a friendship she'd quietly hoped our marriage would cement. My mother attended our wedding 3 years ago and gave a toast that mentioned Trent by name twice, a detail Marcus and I still occasionally reference carefully when we need to remember why we've kept some distance since. I didn't correct her that night either. I told myself it didn't matter because the marriage was mine to build, not hers to approve of. The texts started arriving on Marcus's phone in September from an unfamiliar number, no name attached. The first one read simply, "You deserve to know the truth about Emily." Over the following 6 weeks, Marcus received a slow, deliberate stream of messages from the same number, signed eventually as Jason, claiming to be someone I was seeing, complete with a blurry photo of me at a work conference in Charlotte, standing close to a colleague at a hotel bar, a moment that had lasted exactly as long as it took the picture, and nothing longer. Marcus didn't confront me right away. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. He told me later that the first thing that struck him wasn't the photo, it was the specific phrasing in the texts, formal in a way that didn't match how a jealous secret lover might actually write. He was wearing his gray work fleece the night he finally showed me the messages, sitting at our kitchen table, the sound of rain against the window the only thing filling the silence while I read through 6 weeks of fabricated evidence about my own life. So he worked. Not dramatically. Marcus spent 3 weeks quietly researching the number, running it through a reverse lookup service, cross-referencing the photo against the metadata still embedded in the file, and eventually hired a private investigator, a woman named Renata Cole, who specialized in digital fraud cases, to formally trace it. Renata's report came back in late October. The number belonged to a prepaid SIM card purchased at a Walgreens on Tunnel Road, paid for with a rewards card linked to an account under the name Diane Whitmore. I didn't tell Marcus any of this immediately either. He wanted, he said later, to be completely certain before he said my mother's name out loud in connection with any of it. Renata also pulled the store's security footage from the purchase date, time-stamped and clear, showing my mother at the register, alone, buying exactly one prepaid phone, paying in cash but scanning her rewards card out of habit, the same habit that ended up unraveling everything. I found out everything the same week Marcus did, sitting across from me at our kitchen table again, this time with a folder instead of a phone. I didn't cry immediately. I asked him, calmly, what he wanted to do with what we now knew. He said, "I want your mother to say it herself in front of people who will remember it." I understood exactly what he meant. The invitation to Thanksgiving came from my mother, the way it always did, expecting both of us, unaware that anything had changed. I almost told Marcus we should skip it entirely. He said, if we don't go, she gets to keep telling this story without us in the room to correct it. That was the whole conversation. I could have said no. That's exactly why I went. I wore a simple deep green sweater, nothing that called attention to itself, and put on the sapphire ring the way I do every morning without thinking about it. I wasn't dressing for my mother or for anyone at that table. I was dressing for a holiday that belonged first and only to the marriage she'd tried to end without ever saying it directly. My mother's dining room held the table it always had, 14 places set with her good china, a spread of dishes she'd spent 2 days preparing, the smell of rosemary and roasted turkey filling the whole downstairs. I arrived with Marcus, greeted my aunts and cousins, and took my seat near the middle of the table, across from my mother, who was already refilling her wine glass before the first course had even been served. She'd set the table the way she always did, name cards in her own careful handwriting. Mine placed a seat further from hers than it usually was. A cousin near the end of the table asked how work was going, and I gave her the short, easy version, watching my mother out of the corner of my eye the entire time, the way you watch weather you already know is coming. About halfway through dinner, my mother set down her glass and looked directly at me, then at Marcus, then back at the rest of the table. I have to say something, because I think everyone here deserves to know the truth, since Emily clearly isn't going to bring it up herself. The table went quiet, forks pausing mid-air. I've known for months that Emily's been seeing someone else, a colleague. I've seen the messages myself. I just think it's important that this family doesn't keep pretending everything is fine when it isn't. A few relatives glanced between me and Marcus, unsure whether to keep eating or set their forks down entirely. I said nothing. I touched the sapphire ring on my hand once with my thumb. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and set it on the table, screen facing my mother, already open to a folder of documents. "Here's everyone should see this too," he said, evenly, "because the messages you're talking about didn't come from a colleague. They came from a prepaid phone purchased at the Walgreens on Tunnel Road on September 14th, paid for with your balance rewards card. Here's the store's own security footage, time-stamped, showing you buying it. Here's the private investigator's report confirming the number. And here's 6 weeks of messages sent to my phone, signed Jason, that never came from any real person at all." My mother's face didn't move for a moment.
Then her jaw tightened, and the composed, righteous expression she'd been holding all evening flickered and dropped entirely. My aunt, seated beside her, set down her fork slowly, looking at my mother instead of her plate. My cousin near the end of the table said quietly, "Diane, is that true?" to no real answer. I stood up, the ring catching the light from the chandelier above the table. "I'm not going to spend tonight defending a marriage that was never yours to end," I said, calm, even. "I didn't cheat on anyone. My mother built a fake person and paid for the phone herself to try to make sure I would." I looked at her. "Thank you for dinner. We're going to head out." I looked at Marcus and said, "Ready?" in the same steady voice I'd use for anything else true. We picked up our coats from the hall closet and walked toward the front door. Nobody stopped us. Nobody spoke. I could hear our footsteps against my mother's hardwood floor, the low murmur of the dining room slowly finding words again behind us. 14 relatives sitting with a story that had just been rewritten in front of them. I opened the front door, the cold November air meeting us on the porch, the same porch I'd walked across 1,000 times as a child. We got in the car. Marcus started the engine. Neither of us said anything for the first few blocks.
I found out what happened after we left because my aunt called me 2 days later. My mother tried to explain herself for another 20 minutes at the table, and it didn't go well. 2 more relatives left early, offering quiet goodbyes at the door instead of staying for pie, and my aunt told her plainly, in front of everyone remaining, that she should be ashamed of herself. My mother apparently didn't call anyone for the rest of the week, and even canceled a standing lunch she usually kept with a neighbor every Sunday. I felt something hearing it all, but not the thing I expected. Mostly, I felt like the folder on that table had simply confirmed something I'd already quietly started to understand about her. I called my Aunt Ruth that night, sitting on our back porch with the sapphire ring still on my hand. Ruth has been more of a mother to me in the last decade than my own mother ever fully managed, and it was her voice I wanted to hear. "I heard what happened," she said. "I figured you would," I said. There was a pause. Then she said, "Your father would have wanted you to marry someone who checks the facts before he raises his voice. Sounds like you did." That was all. Ruth has never needed many words when something actually mattered. I hung up the phone and sat there for a while, and for the first time since September, I let myself cry quietly for a few minutes, one hand resting on the ring, listening to Marcus moving around inside the house behind me. Then I went in, and we went to bed, because there was a full week of work waiting in the morning. My mother texted me 4 days later. It read, "I only did what I thought was necessary to protect you. I hope you can understand that someday." No mention of the burner phone, no mention of the receipt. I read it twice. I didn't respond. Today, Marcus and I are coming up on our 4th anniversary. I still wear the sapphire ring every day, the same one I put on the morning of that Thanksgiving dinner, and I've started to think of it less as a gift from before everything happened, and more as something that simply held its shape the whole way through. I started volunteering with a local support group for people navigating estranged or manipulative family relations, since nobody had ever offered me anything like that guidance when I needed it most. Nobody gets to invent a version of your life just because the real one doesn't fit what they wanted for you. What's actually true, documented calmly and completely, will always outlast whatever story someone else tries to build around you first. I didn't need Marcus to open that folder to know what my mother had done. I just needed the table to hear it once clearly before she got to decide how the story ended. If this story reminded you of your own worth, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.